Let's talk about a movie that is out this week.
Yes, this is a film which you've seen and about which you probably know more about the subject matter than I do. So this is The Zone of Interest, which is the new film by Jonathan Glazer, who made Sexy Beast. We recently reviewed the TV series, the TV prequel to Sexy Beast, which I said is very, very unlike the film Sexy Beast. Birth Under the Skin, that extraordinary science fiction film with Scarlett Johansson. This is loosely adapted from a 2014 book by Martin Amis, which I haven't read. Have you read the Martin Amis book? No. Okay, fine. So Christian Friedel plays, correct my pronunciation, Rudolf Höss.
Well, it's Rudolf Höss, yes, because it's an O with an umlaut. And then, because a lot of people go, do you mean Rudolf Höss? You go, no, completely different person.
Rudolf Höss, who real-life SS officer who was the longest-serving commandant at Auschwitz, was executed in 1947. So the film takes place around the edges of the Holocaust is probably a way of describing it. It doesn't ever take us inside the concentration camp. It takes place in this house next door to the camp, this house and garden next door to the camp, where Rudolf lives with his family. Sandra Hüller, who was got her first Oscar nomination for Anatomy of a Fall, so she's got a Best Actress nomination. In fact, I think she could have got a Supporting Actress nomination for this, plays his wife, Hedwig, who is very keen to develop and tend to the dream home in which she now lives. She's proud of her house. She's proud of the grounds. She's proud of the gardens. She wants her husband to get promotions for their social standing to increase. One day, mother comes to visit and is impressed by the house and the gardens, although alarmed by the proximity to the camp. Here's a clip.
Das hier ist die Mauer vom Lager. Ja, das ist die Lagermauer. Also da haben wir auch noch Wein gepflanzt, damit das zuwächst, damit man das nicht mehr so sieht. Vielleicht ist ja Esther Silvermann da drüben. Wer war das nochmal? Die, für die ich geputzt habe.
It's a very brief clip, but so essentially, what they're standing in this garden. And she's saying, so that's the camp wall. So yes, it's just there. Anyway, we've been doing all this sort of flowers and stuff, but it's just there. Oh,
she's just deflecting the whole time because her mum is going, really?
Yeah, it's really that close. The film is up for 5 Oscars, for Glazer for Best Directing and Adapted Screenplay, along with Best Film, International Film, and Best Sound. The sound is really important because you don't see the atrocities in the camp. You hear them. You hear them as a sort of background noise, something that's happening just beyond the edge of the frame, but you don't see it happening. Glazer has talked about this and said it's like what's happening in the camp is almost the other film, or arguably the film, that this is all going on beyond the frame. And there's also a very, very sparse score by Mika Levi, and I love their work. I think Mika Levi is a really interesting composer. But they wrote music for the film that was then hugely pared back to the point that what we now have is a sort of prologue. We have music at the beginning and some at the end, and then we have some sort of soundscapes during the film. But the film itself isn't in any way sort of adorned by music. It's a very, very sparse, very bleak, very kind of chilling, sound space. I think for the thing that's really, well, I mean, there's so many things about the film that make it powerful. One of the things, apparently, Jonathan Glazer set cameras in the house. He described it as like in the way they would do in Big Brother, so that when the people were acting in the house, they could do a lot of it, moving around quite naturally within the house. So there's almost a kind of documentary feel sometimes to the way that the acting happens. But it's also a very, very studied, very precise. The frame is very particular. The way in which things are framed, it's not. There's nothing kind of casual or handheld about it. It's all very, very formal. I think the best way of describing it is it's like a study of looking away. It is a portrait of life going on, in inverted commas, normally, side by side with something that is absolutely unspeakable. And I was reminded of, I went to Berlin, I'm going back to Berlin quite soon, the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, which is this strange thing when you walk into it and there are these low walls. It's like a maze. You walk in and the walls are very, very low down. And then suddenly the next thing you know is that the walls are really big and you've walked into this thing that you're completely trapped by, but you almost didn't notice it was happening. And the juxtaposition of kind of quotidian life and unspeakable horror is what's happening in the film. It's also a portrait of kind of seeping, growing corruption, that a man whose whole life becomes the simple mechanics of killing. And there's a scene later on in which he talks about, he looked at a room of people and all he could think of was, how fast could they be killed? And it's a film about complicity, and I think the fact of its horrible everyday quality makes it worse. People talk sometimes about the banality of evil, which is the great phrase. I don't think this is the banality of evil. I think it's the kind of screaming, silent horror of indifference or callousness. And I was reminded of when Son of Saul came out. One of the interesting things about Son of Saul is, because it's all shot in very close on the central actor's face, the atrocities of the camera, you do see them, but they're glimpsed at the side, they're to the side of the frame. And Claude Lanzmann talked about how that was possibly a way of, the fact that you can approach this subject through fiction and drama. And I think maybe you can only look at something this terrible from the side. It's like sometimes you can't look at something straight on, and maybe looking to the side of it is actually more powerful. I found it very chilling. Now, you know about Höss.
At uni, I did. I read for one of the courses I was taking. I read a book called. It was by Lucy Davidovitz, who's a great Jewish historian, and it was called "The War Against the Jews." And in there, it had a lot of comment about Rudolf Höss, and he was required to write a diary because he was arrested and then hanged at Nuremberg. Mm-hmm. And he wrote, and it's because of his diary that I think this story is there and that this film is made. Because in the diary, he is completely, in inverted commas, normal. He loves his family. He loves his children. He loves animals. He hates cruelty to animals. It is, in that respect, a perfectly ordinary life that you can relate to. And then, as we see in the film, he gets on a horse and he rides into Auschwitz, and we know what's going on there. So I think it's the...
Yes, and the horse is
It's huge, but
a strange detail.
It's very disconcerting, but I thought it was brilliant, mm-hmm. precisely because he was so disconnected and cold about when we see him in his house, it's an ordinary house with ordinary kids going, losing things
and playing and
going in the river and all that. But it's because we know what he's doing when he goes to work, which makes the whole thing increasingly oppressive as we go through. Can I just ask you about the storybook sequences or the kind of the dream sequences?
Yes, in which you see a character sort of coming in and hiding food. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wonder, because people go, I wonder what this is going to do now.
Well, yeah, those sequences are strange, but there's something going on there about a kind. Is it a glimmer of hope? Is it a sort of fairy tale? I thought it was that during the nighttime that the food was being planted. Well, that is what's happening. But you see it in almost like a sort of semi fairy tale environment. To be honest with you, I didn't question it. I thought it was just some kind of glimmer of something, because it's so oppressive. It's so oppressive being in that house with this. And as I said, I think the soundscape is the thing that...
No, it absolutely is. You have to listen to what's going on.
Yeah. Did you have a problem with those sort of storybook sequences?
No, I thought it was slightly out of... precisely because it had felt very documentary, as you mentioned, that suddenly it was doing something else, which it's quite entitled to do.
Yeah, it didn't take me out of the story. I don't think I was entirely sure exactly stylistically what was happening, but I thought that it was... It didn't diffuse the spell of the film for me, which is oppressive, and I think Sandra Hüller is brilliant. I think she's absolutely brilliant in it, and I thought her performance was utterly believable and quietly chilling.
It also taps into the conversation which we've had a number of times about other similar movies about monsters, and how if you're portrayed as a monster on television or in a movie, it sort of isn't good enough because Rudolf Höss is not. He does monstrous things, but he's not a monster because we see him at home being normal. It needs a deeper explanation, which you are forced to come out and try and come to terms with.
Also, I think we should say, because next week Steve McQueen is, I think, is coming on the program.
Yes.
Is that right? And is coming on to talk about his new film, Occupied City, which again is about the Holocaust. And I do think it's really important that these stories continue to be told, and it continues to be brought back into your immediate consciousness.
Correct.
It's Zone of Interest is not an easy watch, nor should it be. But I think it is right and good that this story is being constantly retold.